Terrell Jermaine Starr. He's the founder of Black Diplomats. That's a weekly foreign affairs podcast that tells stories, but from a Black perspective. He's also a Fulbright scholar, and Terrell has over 4 years of experience living in the former Soviet Union, Ukraine. Wow. And more than 8 years of experience working as a reporter. Thank you so much for joining us, Terrell.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate being on.
Yeah, all right. So tell us a little bit about Black Diplomats.
So Black Diplomats is a place where Black folk can talk about the world, basically. And that's as simple as that. And I called it Black Diplomats because we have this idea that just because you're not in the foreign service, or you're not a Secretary of State, or you don't work at the State Department, or you don't work in someone's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that you can't be a diplomat, or you can't have conversations about diplomacy and what that means and how you want to intersect that. And so with Black Diplomats, I decided to democratize what that means. And so it's not so much about talking about the issue of, I don't know, let's just say the Russia or the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine, for example, or talking about the Iran deal. It's how do I make a conversation about foreign policy interesting and applicable to everyday people? Because we already were overwhelmed by domestic politics, right? And so when you bring on international subjects that people especially don't have any connection to or feel that way, it's my job to say, hey, if you travel to Mexico for vacation, that's a part of diplomacy because you're crossing borders. And so I try to tell people that even if you've never traveled the world before, that doesn't mean that you're not curious about it. And so with my first 3 episodes, first episode I interviewed a Black woman who left her corporate job and decided to travel the world for a full year. And she talked about what it meant to be in corporate America and didn't like that, which is something everybody can relate to. And so,
absolutely.
So just take it there. And she said, you know what? I'm going to take these corporate dollars I made and I'm going to travel and do the things that I want to do. And so she now teaches people to budget and save. And so the next episode is a little bit more intense, where I'm interviewing a Ethiopian woman an Ethiopian woman who immigrated to Canada, and she is organizing Ethiopian women in Lebanon who've been discriminated against and who face a wide range of workers' rights issues. And so now, and I'm also interviewing a woman who won a Pulitzer Prize, not Pulitzer, but a Nobel Prize.
Wow. You know what, wait, let's slow on that one real quick, just because I do not want to pass up on this woman who is making this push in Canada, just because there's been so much in terms of uprising here in the United States. And it sounds like you are really capturing the voices of the other uprisings that are going on internationally. Is that right?
Absolutely, and that's the whole thing with Black Diplomats. I want everybody to know that collectively and globally, we all are together. And so the uprising that was resulted from George Floyd's death and Breonna Taylor's death, basically we have uprisings that are going on across the world with our people and Black people who are really doing the work. And so, Banshee Yeamer, who is a domestic worker in Yemen for 7 or 8 years. She was organizing. She went through and immigrated there, was kicked out, but was no longer worked there. But right now, Lebanon is dealing with a currency crisis, and so what's happening is that people who employed Ethiopian workers, they're tossing them at the embassy. And so,
wow, that's a lot going on. And there's so many of these stories that we need to really dive into. And it sounds like the Black Diplomats just really gives that to us. And I think that there's something that I'd love you to expound upon here in terms of how enriched the conversations are, because they are from a Black perspective. What do you think that adds to the conversation, since the vast majority of foreign diplomacy, any kind of foreign politics, are discussed from a white perspective?
Well, the problem is that the reason why international affairs is discussed from a white perspective is because it's a part of colonialism, it's a part of imperialism, and so when you think about the world powers, America is an imperialist power, Russia is an imperialist power, and so people who are occupiers, people who are oppressors, are normally racists, right? And so who are the racists? They're normally people who are white. Who are the occupiers? They normally are, or people who colonize, who have who are over overseers of the mass industrial military complex. They are white people. You think about the colonization of Africa that comes from Europe. You think about the expansionism of Russia. You think about America. You think about, our roles across the world through the CIA and, and through all of our intelligence agencies. It's basically, that's where it comes from. And I think the hardest conversation that I've had with people is really about how do we decolonize the conversation? And that's what I talk about with Black Diplomats. We decolonize the conversation. And if you want to decolonize the conversation, then you have to get rid of the colonizers, right?
Yeah,
and it means white people in all kindness and listen, I mean, there are a lot of white people who I will be interviewing. I've interviewed some, but they're more kind of like Eastern Europeans, et cetera. But but you have to be intentional about it. And so colonization, white supremacy, those are very purpose-driven systems of oppression. And so in order to untangle that, we have to do it purposefully. And that's what Black Diplomats does, which is why for the first 10 episodes, everybody is a woman. And on every show, most of them, there's a Black woman on the show. And then there are some shows where it's just all Black women, or as a Black woman who I'm interviewing, featuring directly.
That is fantastic. And I do love that, largely because, women have been oppressed significantly just across the globe. So you are really kind of just reaching truly down to people who have that real experience and whose voices haven't been heard. And one thing I really want to kind of touch on, because I think your journey has been so unique. You are a senior reporter for The Root. You've also spent considerable time abroad in Ukraine. What has that journey been like for you as a Black man in regions of the world that are pretty much, not really occupied by Black people?
I basically had to extend a lot of grace, and it's a difference between living in a country for 3 years or 4 years versus visiting someplace for a week and not learning the language, not understanding the culture. So it's changed me. I'm a very different person in the foreign affairs space than I am in my regular job. And I say that because in order for me to live in Russia, in order for me to live in Ukraine, there's a lot of grace that I've had to extend to people. There's a lot of education that I've had to offer to people who know very little about Black folks. And so it's something I'm really going to be writing about in my memoir that's going to come out next year, where I talk about borders. And so being in Detroit is that it's like many big cities, it's really we've all been segregated by our borders. When you think about redlining, you think about the ways in which urban planning was mapped out for Black people who immigrated from the South up north. So we all are used to borders and being told where we can go and where we can't go. And so going to countries like Ukraine and going to Russia and other places in Eastern Europe that understand imperialism, that understand what it means to have their borders breached, that's something that I can relate to. And so that's the dynamic with which I engage folks. And so that's a very personal understanding that helps me to relate to people, because before I went to Ukraine, before I crossed the American borders, I often thought about, hey, everybody's white, everybody's the same. So you go and you talk to a Georgian person who says that in Russia, we're considered Black too. You're like, you all look white to me, but the more you live there and the more you understand these folks, the more you realize that your ideas of what whiteness is in America are not the same as they are here. And so it's been a very personal journey where I'm exploring how to best translate the world to my fellow Americans. And that's something that's very personal, but it feels good. It's a challenge that I'm up to.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure that challenge is coming in handy right now, as we've had this uprising since we've had, unfortunately, the loss of George Floyd. And as a result of having these renewed and just really needed conversations about race, a lot of white people have been wondering what they can do and what change they can make. And you kind of suggested that you've had to extend people a lot of grace and really had to almost teach. And so what do you think is different from your experiences abroad than what you've seen here in terms of the dominant culture wanting to learn more about essentially a group that they've oppressed?
I think it's harder for me to do it here because I'm closer to the problem here and to the problem makers here. Whereas with a Ukrainian, I can make the excuse of, oh, they don't know any better because they don't have the same history as we do. Now, of course, they understand racism, they understand oppression, and they understand their privilege within it because they discriminate against their local Black people just like white people here do. So I want to make that clear. But because there's a bit of a distance in regards to history, in regards to culture, it's easier for me to do it over here. Now, what it has done is that it's allowed me to get into serious conversation about how do I extend that grace here. And so normally on my Twitter feed, I sound like a kind of radical militant person or what have you. But the one thing that this book process and my living in this part of the world has done for me is let me know what my purpose is. And my purpose is ultimately I am a person of the world. And when it's appropriate, I try to extend grace here. And so because in this role, even as I'm doing this podcast, there are so many white people who come to me and they ask me for assistance, they ask me for guidance. But if they do it in a respectful way, I don't mind doing it. And so, and also that there's privileges as a man that I have, and I get all of that, and it's very different from what a black woman would experience. But it's helping me to grow and to understand how to do that here in the States. But had I not gone to the former Soviet Union, I would not have that empathy that I'm exploring right now.
All right. Well, we don't have very much time left. So do you want to tell the viewers where they can find you?
Yeah, so Black Diplomats, we can go to our website, blackdiplomats.net. And we are available on all of your podcast apps. So whether it be Apple, whether it be Google, we're everywhere, Spotify, wherever.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Terrell.
Hey, thank you so much.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below. Then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.